We have a great morning for everyone. And before I introduce myself a little bit and talk about our special guests and talk about where we're going to go, I had an email conversation. I invited someone who's in the recovery community or coming into the recovery community to talk today. She couldn't make it, but she wrote me an email. A true story. She said, I wanted to know your opinion about marijuana. I hear from a lot of people in the recovery community that it's harmless and not addictive. This is somebody who's going to be serving our patients. And my reply, after I took a deep breath, was, sadly, people who have that belief are underinformed about the status of the science and the status of research, and welcome them to come to my talk and see what they think. So I'll tell you how we're going to go at this problem. And I consider it a problem. First of all, I'm going to admit that over the last decade, I've been a proud group of a collection of drug dealers. What do I mean by that? I mean that it's pretty clear that physicians have been instrumental in promulgating the opiate abuse epidemic. Unwittingly, perhaps, but it's pretty clear that being underinformed about the risks of things can cause harm. Look at the last decade. Look at the number of opiate-dependent teenagers who died last year. And that's pretty clear that being underinformed can lead to big problems, death, and all that kind of thing. So there's nothing new under the sun. Much of what I say today is going to be known to people in the community. You may not be aware of the specific studies. And I really believe in the power of science to inform us. Most of the people I approach are very interested and helped by understanding the science of what we're dealing with. Science is a special way of knowing things. If you've had someone in your life who's been addicted to marijuana, you would never have a thought in the world how could, this is ridiculous that it's not, have potential harms. But I want to give you a sense of the breadth of the research about this substance. If anybody's interested in having some resources, there are two fantastic summary papers this year with people with just massive amounts of experience that you can email me about to get a summary of what do we know about marijuana these days. Hamp Atkinson, who's been in the field for decades and decades, couldn't be here today, but another researcher. I said, what would you want to tell the audience about marijuana? And he actually was funded to study the benefits of cannabis, and there are some, for tiny, tiny groups of people. And he said, if you're an adolescent, don't use marijuana. And there are risks to this drug. So with that entree, I'm going to mostly focus on the harms and risks, because anyone who you're counseling will be well aware of the potential benefits. As part of our discussion, by the way, we have a special guest, Nick Cheshire, who's done research for a long time. He has worked with hundreds or thousands of marijuana-dependent individuals. He actually recruits them to come in and do different things, and so he's going to close up my presentation. And then we have someone who's going to put a human face on this. Jason was kind enough to tell us a little bit about his story, to put a human face on this, because that's what it's all about, right? I'm going to show you graphs and research, but we want to try to help people thrive. So with that introduction, and I apologize, I'm going to be walking in front of this. This is my contact information. If you want, just call Lasting Recovery. If you say, hey, can I get a copy of that study to give to parents? Carl Sandburg. I was thinking of a meteorological metaphor for marijuana. And Carl Sandburg, who actually won 3 Nobel Prizes, he was a productive guy, good Midwestern American poet. 2 for poetry and then 1 for, I can't remember what his other one was, for a book or something. But I always think of marijuana as a fog. Fog is a kind of meteorologic phenomenon that's not terrifically catastrophic. It's not, if meth is a hurricane and heroin is a tsunami, a fog is kind of a different phenomenon, right? But if you've driven in the fog, and if you've tried to fly in the fog, fog can cause a lot of problems. And Sandburg reminds us that the fog comes in on little cat feet. Marijuana dependence is one of those syndromes that I often think about as kind of sneaky and occult. And it's one of those, how many times, Jeff, have we said, it's one of those that people kind of want to keep in the closet, right? Like, I get that my liver is, and the heroin, but the pot I kind of want to keep in the closet. So this is our metaphor for marijuana dependence. This is a fog. I'm going to be showing some images today. So Obama reminds us that yes, we cannabis. And anybody remember his speech, Just Words? Great speech. Someone accused him of just having just words. And then he said, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Is that just words? He said, you know, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Are these just words? Just pot is another metaphor for this substance that, again, when we look, I hope by the end of the talk you're going to say, gosh, you kind of convinced me that this drug has a lot of potential harms. If you're marijuana dependent and in recovery, I'm going to be showing some images which may be triggering. I couldn't give the talk and not do that, but caveat emptor, take your deep breaths and think about your future and you'll be fine. Here's my goal. Here's the problem, folks. I'm going to try to tickle your left brain with some data, with science, okay? Part of what we're facing, and our teens are facing, this is the most vulnerable group, is that there's a massive industry that's going to be promulgating marijuana in a million forms. It's going to have a lot of ad money. There's going to be a lot of information behind this that's going to try to appeal to people's right brains. This is a video that, anybody ever seen this Reefer Madness or the movie? It's hilarious. Look at it on YouTube. We couldn't get the internet here, but it was back in the 20s, was it? And people were, and then running out of windows, and like men were stabbing their wives, and you know, I mean, listen, I'm a scientist. I talk to people in recovery. I'm not going to try to scare the pants off of anybody because everybody here knows people and presidents and senators who've smoked marijuana and have been okay in their life. So we're going to really try to focus on science and not go overboard. I'm not going to discuss the benefits of marijuana, and there are some benefits to certain components of this plant, medical benefits. Research has clearly shown that. I'm not going to, one of my least favorite arguments is the least worst. Well, it's better than. Rather than, is this something that's going to help an individual be their best and thrive? It's like, well, it's not as bad as. You know, it's the low bar argument, right? I hate that argument. It's just really, like, that's what, right? It's less worse than. I'm not going to discuss the politics and economic arguments behind legalization and decriminalization. There are some compelling ones. But that's not what we're talking about. That's a different discussion. And I'm not going to discuss the non-brain health risks of marijuana. I'm going to focus on the organ between our ears. It affects the rest of the body. I'll show you a little a blurb about this. It's interesting to talk to your male patients about this risk. But mostly I'm focusing on the brain. Because cannabis affects a lot of parts of the body. You know, you get your red sclera, you get your other things, but the brain is the organ we're going to focus on. That's the organ where dependency comes from. Marijuana is extraordinarily common, as everybody knows. Thank you. A lot of Americans have used marijuana, and that's THC. And this is, as everybody knows, this is going to be getting more and more on the West Coast. We're at the center of this, aren't we? Right? We're at the center of this discussion in California and on the West Coast, and I think we're going to be seeing the collateral damage. That's the term I use for the opiate addiction that came from doctors prescribing too many opiates. We're going to be seeing the collateral damage in California. This is what we're going to be facing, folks. Anybody know what's in these soft drinks? Okay, well, you can get your grape ape, doc, weed, okay? Marijuana is going to be coming out in more flavors and more colors and more packaging. And I mean, how do we compete with this? That's pretty sexy. I can almost promise you this woman has never used cannabis. But you can get it in a vape, you can get it in a spray, you can get it in a delivery system. There's candy from Weed World, right? How about the Butterfinger? You like that one, right? Mr. Greenbud. There's pot tarts. It just keeps coming. Now, remember when we used to bag on Marlboro for marketing to kids? Who is pot tarts marketing to? Actually, 20-year-old kids in college, but that's... And here's my fear that this stuff drives epidemics. It really does. We saw that clearly with the opiate epidemic. This stuff, because if you're a business graduate, guess what you're thinking about marketing and trying to push the sale of? There's a lot of money here, folks. And we're just sitting in the background saying, but what about the harms as this just comes rolling out? So this is what you all are going to be facing with me. And we've seen this before with opiates. This is a quote from the New Yorker. 2007, Purdue Pharma, who made the non-addictive long-acting OxyContin. Anybody ever heard of OxyContin? Executives pled guilty to criminal charges that had misled the FDA clinicians and patients about the risks of OxyContin addiction and abuse by aggressively marketing the drug to providers and patients as a safe alternative to short-acting narcotics. That was 2007 they pled guilty. This happened earlier than that. Anybody have any doubt that money was part of the driver behind the opiate epidemic? So this is just what we have to have in the back of our mind when we're thinking about the risks and harms of this drug. My son loves Calvin and Hobbes. It's true, Hobbes, ignorance is bliss. We can't be ignorant about the risks. I was trying to explain this to one of my kids this morning. Your ignorance of the scientific facts is appalling. What does appalling mean? Okay. So again, what I'm presenting today is the science behind marijuana dependence. When did ignorance become a point of view?